Thank you. Hi. If I hold this about here, does that work? Can we hear me okay? Fantastic. It's weird holding a handheld mic. I feel like should be doing stand-up comedy or something. So it's good to be back here. So many familiar faces. I'm really worried because there's a couple of people I know at the front and they have things to throw. So right. I've been in technology for about 30 years. I did the math recently and it's really worrying. 30 odd years. And so I'm here speaking to a group of testers about testing as a programmer. I am such a fake, right? So just to be aware, there's imposter syndrome where you feel like you don't know something and there's actually being an imposter. So I'm doing the second one. So I want you to all be aware that I know this, okay? So you don't need to remind me. Probably don't need my phone. So yes, so this is a talk I put together a couple of years ago. So weirdly, so I accidentally invented behavior-driven development a while ago, 2003. I never expected it to catch on. It did, which was kind of fun. And then it got its own conference, which was weird. And so now I have a kind of standing invite to speak at my own conference. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about the relationship between BDD and testing. And a larger part of this was because when I hear about people using BDD, applying BDD, it's often started by testers or testing groups within a company. And I found that interesting, and I started digging into that. So here's my motivation. Here's why I want to talk about this. The first thing I think is this, is testers, and I hear this a lot, testers feel left behind by Agile. So I go into organizations, I work with lots of different organizations, and there's stuff for everyone else. So all the project managers can go off on this 2-day residential class and come back as certified Scrum Masters. It's wonderful. Like, oh, there we go, I'm a Scrum Master now. And all the business analysts go off on a different 2-day residential class and come back as product owners. And they go, woo! It's like being a business analyst, but with a big stick, right? And all the programmers can go on all kinds of, like, there's clean code, and there's TDD, and there's code retreats, and there's all kinds of stuff they can do. And they can go off and get stuff. And then the testers are like, what about me? And so what happens is, then we talk about these cross-functional teams, and cross-functional teams have all the different skills in that you need. So you get testers embedded into teams, and you get all these testing teams going, where do we fit? What do we do then? And how do we... And so we talk about maybe taking those teams and dispersing them into delivery teams. And they're like, well, that's great for a localized delivery view of the world, but what about a more kind of broad view of the world? And anyway, we're not allowed to do that because that's moving people around, and HR don't let us do that. So we've got processes around that. This made me sad. Discovering that BDD is a countable noun. And that people have BDDs. And I was like, oh, we've got all the BDDs. We have to run all the BDDs. I'm like, what is a BDD? And they went, oh, and it turns out it's basically, it's an executable scenario. It's like a Cucumber feature file or a spec flow thing, right? And they call them BDDs, and they have hundreds of these things. I'm being generous. They often have thousands of these things. And the way you make a new BDD is a lot like the Gutenberg press. You just go copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. But you just change 2 of the words, and that's your next BDD. So you have this whole BDD factory thing, which surprised me. And then I saw people hiring for automation testers. And what's an automation? Anyone here describe themselves as an automation tester? Does anyone here do that really awkwardly because that's what someone was hiring for? Right? And actually they consider themselves a tester who happens to know automation, but that's about as interesting as happening to know violin, right? What they actually are hiring is a tester who can automate stuff. And generally, basically, what really precipitated this was I had a couple of clients, weirdly in the same week, right? So how's this for a coincidence? Said to me, and they're very different companies. One was a big media, broadcasting firm in the UK, and the other is a massive retailer, multi-billion-dollar retailer. And they both said in the same week, hey Dan, can you recommend some some training for testers who are moving into agile ways of working? We found training for everyone else, but not much for the testers. And I was like, that can't be hard. Let me go and have a look. So I looked around and, well, I'll talk about it a bit later, but I wasn't happy with what I saw, to the extent I ended up designing my own class called Testing Faster, which is what I thought would be just widespread, commonplace out there in the training market. Turns out this thing doesn't exist. And also when I talked to testers, I found they were generally unsettled around this idea of a software engineering test or a software development engineering test. So SET came out of Google, SDET came out of Microsoft. This idea of programmers moving into these testing roles and testers going, what's up with that? And really not understanding the relationship. So if you're in a hurry, okay, there's a bar over there, so I'll get through the good stuff now and then you can go and have a drink. And then anyone who's left here, we'll talk about some other stuff. So here's my thesis, right? Programmers don't understand testing. As a programmer, right? I don't understand. I believe, generally, it's a reason, to a first approximation, programmers don't understand testing. I'm going to try and argue this. I'm also going to try and argue Agile doesn't understand testing. Ooh, bit more controversial, right? I'm then going to suggest that BDD is appealing to testers and why BDD is appealing to testers. And then I'm going to throw in the grenade that BDD, however, is not about testing. Okay, so that's really what I want to do with this session now. As I said, if you're thirsty, bar's there, that's what I'm doing. Okay, there are no more surprises. Before we do this, though, we need to talk about testing. Okay, I think we need to talk about testing. So, why do we have testing? I've got a room full of testers. Who here is the tester? Who are the testers? Loads of you. Who are programmers? Cool, I'm really glad lots of programmers came along to this. I'm very happy about that. Who are the other people? Who else is here? What do you do? Call out some things you do. Product owner, right? That's, okay, yep. What else? We could talk about that all night, but yes, it's a product owner. So you used to be a business analyst, didn't you? Okay. I'm teasing, that's fine. Well, who else have we got? What other roles do we have? What other people? We have an automation tester, someone who tests the automation. No, that's not right. Okay, we have managers, so you have people who are causes of work in other people. Okay, cool. So, okay, well then I'm going to throw this out. This is like where you get to say stuff. Why do we have testing? Why do we have testing in our world? To assure quality, says the tester. Brilliant. Right. Take your certificate, on you go. So yes, why else? What other things? Come on, call some things out. To be confident, to break stuff. To make future changes easier. Okay, I like that. What else? I wish that were true. Fulfill requirements. Okay, so here's the main reason I get. We have to. We've got SDLC, and box number 5 is testing. Can't get from box number 4 to box number 6 without going through testing. Box number 5. So analysis, design, detailed design, coding, testing, release. So it's there, it's box number 5. Okay? So that's the thing we have to do. And so I think, well, maybe I'm just being cynical here. So I go and ask some programmers. I say, what do you think about testing? And they go, honestly, it just gets in the way a bit, really. You know, if we didn't have testing, I could probably go faster. I don't know, I reckon. And then I talk to the project managers, and they say, well, yeah, well, actually, it's a source of risk. Which is a lot like saying that messengers are the source of bad news. So if we don't want bad news, there's a lovely W.C. Fields quote where he says, I read about the damage that alcohol can do, and because of that, I gave up reading. Right? So project managers, so testing is always the thing that gets squeezed. Okay, the project plan's going, or overrunning. It's okay, we can shave some off the testing. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Okay, And so these are some of the things I hear, and that tells me this. That tells me that testing is viewed as non-differentiating, whether we have testing or whether we don't. It's kind of who cares. And it's non-critical, right? The world won't end if we kind of don't do it. And so this caused me to think about, there's a model I want to share with you. It's a lovely model called the Purpose Alignment Model. A chap called Neil Nikolaisen came up with this. I think he's Danish. And it's a quadrant because he's a consultant, and we love our quadrants. So the Purpose Alignment Model, it says, so we have two axes, whether it's market differentiator versus whether it's business critical. So in this bottom left corner here, we have a thing called who cares, right? Non-differentiated, non-critical, who cares? Hack it, write a script, put it in Excel, who cares, right? We just want to make it go away. So bottom right corner is things that are critical to the business, but non-differentiating. So your email systems, your servers, your payroll system. No one's going to go, oh, I want to work at Amazon because they've got the best payroll system, right? Said no one ever. But if you stopped paying people at Amazon, do you think they would continue to turn up to work? I'm going with no. So it's critical, but no one cares about the system itself. And so what I care about there is parity. I just want to be the same as anyone else. There's no point being better than anyone else, but it's being worse than anyone else is bad. So as long as my email system kind of works, it's fine. It doesn't have to be great. It just have to not be rubbish. ThoughtWorks, I worked out for many years. Famously, they used, or internally famously at least, they used Lotus Notes for like loads of stuff for a really long time, including mail. And when you left, you had an exit interview, and you were, why are you leaving? Well, I found this other thing over here. Or why are you leaving? Well, I've just... And the most common reason for leaving was Lotus Notes. So it can be a differentiator. Anyway, so now top left is where it's differentiating, but it's non-critical. So this is where I experiment. This is where I try new stuff. And when you try new stuff with a partner. Try new stuff with someone who's good at that stuff. If you're doing your cloud migration, right, you can either just wing it and fail epically. So where's Aaron and his testing gone? Oh my goodness, right? This is just a chaos engineering gold. Is all the companies trying to move into the cloud? I'm going to throw in two grenades. One grenade says data in transit, and the other grenade says data at rest. Okay, I'll be back in 6 months, right? So I want to partner with someone who's already good at this, yeah. And then my top right corner, invest in Excel. Okay, so this is where it's differentiating and it's critical to my business, and I really, really want to be good at this. So ideally, most of my energy should be in that top right corner. So my goal is to move that vertical line to the left to do less non-critical work, and to move the horizontal line down to do less non-differentiating work. And the more I can move that out of the shop, the better. And it means that my scarce resources, all you hopefully very expensive people, right, get to do the invest in Excel work. Okay, so in this model, that's where testing is. Okay, we decided testing is non-differentiating, non-critical. We cared so much about testing, we offshored it. Right, we sent it off to India. And amusingly, India then subbed it out to Vietnam. True story. So I think of inexpensive testers, I think of high volume, I think of low skill, I think of commodity work. That's where my mental model of testing is here. So I started thinking about the goal of testing. What's the point of testing? Why do we test? What is the... Okay, let me ask a slightly different question. There is a system of work in which I have testing. There is an equivalent system of work which is exactly the same but without testing in it. Why is this one better? Right? What's the point of testing? What's the goal of testing? You want to know that you broke stuff. Okay. I actually had this conversation with a senior engineer once. He said, I do not write tests. He was French, so I'm doing my French accent. I do not write tests because I do not have bugs. So do you not want to have any automated testing? It is a waste of time. I write good code. But you got this whole team of people. What about them? They have to write good code too. That was it. That was it. We're done. We don't need testing. All right, good code. I was like, wow, I'll take that to the bank. That's perfect. Thank you. So goal of testing. What do we think the goal of testing is? The purpose, the reason. Catch the bugs before they hit production. I love that. Go on.
To know where is the bad.
To know where is...
Where is the error?
Yeah, to know where the errors are. Okay, yeah. Reduce risk. Okay. So I hear things like this. Find information. The goal of testing is to find information. That's called research. We have a word for that. Finding information is called research. Testing is a different thing. That's research. Okay, you can call that testing if you like, but you're wrong. Okay, to communicate. There's a word for that as well. Guess what the word for that is? Yeah, you see? We don't need the word testing to mean communication when we've got the word communication. So, any guesses where the next one came from? Where'd it go? Come back. To enable us to reasonably believe that the probability is low that the product still has important undiscovered problems. Yes, the context-driven testers. Bless them. I may well talk about checking versus testing later. It depends how angry I get. Anyway, right, I didn't really buy any of those. I thought all of those are just like, that's not really the point of it to me. So another data point then, there was a lovely, and this is, so on Stack Overflow, all of you are aware of Stack Overflow, right? So on Stack Overflow, there's every now and then there's a question that they deem off topic or whatever, it's not really part of, but then they freeze it in anthracite because it's so cool, right? They keep it for posterity, and this happened to this question. So someone posted a question on Stack Overflow, how deep are your unit tests? In other words, and basically what they're saying is like, do you test all your getters and setters, and do you test every single line of code, and do you da-da-da-da-da? And much to this person's surprise, Kent Beck replied, who basically, I don't know, invented TDD, but certainly wrote it down. And he replied, and he said something that people weren't expecting him to say. He said, I get paid for code that works, not for tests. So my philosophy is to test as little as possible to reach a given level of confidence. And the comments under this reply are just solid gold. They're like, oh, how can you say that? You're our savior and you're saying not to write tests. It's just joyful, right? So I kind of agree with this, but I think there's an ellipsis here. I think there's a bit missing here. To reach a given level of confidence, for whom? Whose confidence do we care about when we're thinking about testing? Okay, so here's what I think the goal of the goal of testing is. And I've been iterating on this for a while. This is where I've currently got to, and currently is about 4 years into thinking about this. I'll happily take edits or suggestions because I still don't think it's right, but it's close enough. I think the goal of testing is this: increasing confidence for stakeholders through evidence. Right? Let me unpack that a bit because there's quite a lot in there. There's 3 separate elements to this. Stakeholders. What does that mean? Who are stakeholders? Who are stakeholders? Again, that's one of those questions where you get to say stuff. People that request changes are stakeholders. Who else are stakeholders? Sorry? People who pay you, right? The sponsors, the project budget holders. Sorry? Investors, they're stakeholders. Users are stakeholders. Who else? The team, the people who are building this software are stakeholders. What about the people that come after them? Oh yes, they're stakeholders. Anyone involved in this delivery is a stakeholder. My favorite description of stakeholders, a chap called Mark McNeil, who was a UX consultant at ThoughtWorks back in the day and is a brilliant user experience engineer. And his definition or his description of stakeholders is people whose lives you touch. Oh, isn't that gorgeous? Anyone whose life you touch by writing software is a stakeholder. Upstream, that's business stakeholders, that's sponsors, that's downstream is users, is operations, is support, is all of those people involved in running your system, is audit and compliance are all stakeholders, and legal and security and all of those other lots and lots and lots of people are stakeholders in the systems you build. So, there's my stakeholders. Increasing confidence is a tricksy phrase, right? So for each of these stakeholders, and you can slice this by stakeholder, for each of these stakeholders, what do they need confidence in? Okay, so as a security stakeholder, right, what does my security stakeholder care about? What keeps him or her up at night, yeah? What does my compliance stakeholder care about? What things do they need confidence in? And so on. What do my users need confidence in? What do my operations people need confidence in? And there's different ways of providing confidence. I could say, do you know what? Trust me. It's fine. I am a great programmer. I do not write bugs. Okay? Okay, well then let's ship it. It's fine. No, right? No. A trust me, honestly, I'm good at this is not good enough, right? Through evidence. Okay? So how are you going to demonstrate this? How can you prove to me that the confidence I have is justified confidence? Because an awful lot of testing is actually popping balloons, is popping holes in false confidence, is falsifying a sense of confidence that is unjustified. And so actually what I'm doing is reducing uncertainty. But when you say reducing uncertainty to people, they go, what? So I say increasing confidence, and they go, oh. Okay, so really, reducing uncertainty. Okay, through evidence. So that means that my tester, and again, a tester isn't necessarily a person, it's a mindset, it's a role. My tester has 3 superpowers. Okay, my ideal tester has 3 superpowers. The first thing they have is empathy. As a tester, you need to be able to get inside the head of security, compliance, users, operations, support, everyone, right? You need to be able to get inside their heads, walk in their shoes, whatever metaphor works for you. If you walk a mile in someone's shoes, you're a mile away and you have their shoes, right? It's all win. Okay. Don't worry, I'll wait. Empathy. So you need to be able to really understand what the world looks like from their perspective, okay? So if you have a narcissistic personality disorder, you're not going to make it as a tester, all right? I'm just putting it out there. The second superpower you have is ingenuity. Sometimes that evidence is really tricksy. Sometimes that evidence is about wiresharking the network. Sometimes that evidence is poking around in the database after the action's over. Sometimes that evidence is intercepting the call while it's happening, right? Sometimes the evidence isn't in the system at all. Sometimes the evidence is in tracking the eye movement of the person using it. Yeah? So we need to be really smart, really ingenious about how we get things. And the third thing we need is pragmatism, is balance. I don't have infinity time, I don't have infinity money, I don't have infinity people. I need to make trade-offs. We have made a change in this system. I need to be confident on behalf of all kinds of different stakeholders that this change is safe to put out into the world, right? Who's going to care? What are they going to care about? What degree of evidence do I need of what kind to provide to which stakeholders in order to ... Okay? So, increasing confidence for stakeholders through evidence. If you don't think testing's about that, we'll chat afterwards, okay? Or at the conference or something. I'm pretty convinced. I've tested this statement with a bunch of testers who I trust, and actually a bunch of testers who I don't trust. And they all seem to agree that this is at least a reasonably good stab. So, now we all have a common understanding of at least what Daniel thinks testing is about. Yeah, super. Now we're ready to talk about programmers. Right, programmers don't understand testing. I want to draw your attention. Exhibit A. I present for your delectation. Exhibit A, an article I wrote called Test-Driven Development is Not About Testing. Okay? So, I'd like to draw your attention to a number of elements of this article. I wrote it a while ago. Some of you weren't born when I wrote this. Okay. What else? A number of people have read it. Right? That is not representative because that's about the 3rd website it's been hosted on. What else? I've always been this good looking. Although I did at one point think that a moustache was a good idea. So yeah, there was that. But mostly the thing I want to talk about is the title. Because I wrote this article, Test-Driven Development is Not About Testing, and immediately got what 16 years ago, we didn't have the word trolling, but I got trolled. Right? I got hate for this. I had programmers saying, test-driven development, why are programmers writing tests? We've got testers to write tests. And I had testers going, programmers shouldn't be writing tests, they don't understand testing. And I was like, you didn't even get as far as the title. Right? If you'd even read the title, I wouldn't mind, but they hadn't. So what I was trying to do was I was taking this testing idea from the bottom left quadrant, at least saying it's business critical. Right, saying at least it's a thing that we need to do. Yay, animation, go animation. So testing it now is at least something we have to be as good at everyone else at. We can't just ignore it now. We understand that testing is critical. You can think of testing as a control function. It's a governing constraint. Without testing, we cannot know whether what we're doing is right. With testing, we can at least believe that we know. So maybe it's critical, but it's non-differentiating. Maybe it's like compliance, right? Maybe it's in that corner. Okay. Agile doesn't understand testing. This one's a bit more tricky. What I mean by this is this, and again, I've done the maths, right? Agile methods were invented by programmers, all of them. Okay, so not just Scrum, XP, DSDM, Adaptive, Feature-Driven, Crystal. There's a whole bunch of different Agile methods. BDD was invented by that's an Agile method, yes. It's a second-generation Agile method invented by a programmer, exactly. I will add that to my list. The only possible Agile signatory who might be viewed as a tester is Brian Marek, and he doesn't describe himself as a tester. He describes himself as a micro-scale, retro-futurist, anarcho-syndicalist. I'm not kidding. And you can ask him what anarcho-syndicalism and retro-futurism are, and he knows. Which is why it's really, really worth spending time with Brian Marek if you ever get the opportunity. And which is why I'm fairly convinced that he did. No, I won't say anything because of being recorded, but I reckon he's got a past. So testing's implied, right? Testing is implied in Agile. You know, if you say to any Agile folks, what do you think about testing? It's rubbish, right? We should just not test. They go, no one's going to say, no, it's not, but it's implied. When Kent Beck wrote the original XP explained book, called The White Book, also known as the Old Testament, in 1998 or whatever it was, he talked about 4 values. There's 4 values to XP. There's simplicity, feedback, communication, and courage. I'm really glad I remembered those, because that would have been embarrassing. It's these 4 values. And the interesting thing about this book is the first part of XP Explained is him talking about extreme programming and working collaboratively and these 4 values. And the whole second part of the book is basically an experience report. We did this thing at Chrysler and it was really cool and we blah. And the problem was it then got turned into dogma. And if you weren't doing all 12 of the XP practices, you weren't doing pure XP. And then someone threw in retrospectives and they went all 12, 13 of the Agile. It was all very silly. And so he then wrote a second edition of the book. And it wasn't a revision of the book, it was a rewrite. Right? He realized people completely missed the point the first time. So now he wrote the Extreme Programming Explained second edition, known as the New Testament. Okay. And in that, he doubles down on the values. And he says, like, look, the practices are interesting, but the values. And he adds one. He goes, communication, simplicity, feedback, courage, and respect. He added respect as a 5th Agile value. Why did he do that? Because he had to. Oh, yes, because he had to. Because like, for him, it's so intrinsic. Why would you have that as an explicit value? It's like, you know, simplicity, feedback, communication, courage, and not kicking puppies, right? Why should you have to itemize that? Answer, because people are kicking puppies. And so we need to say that we are the not kicking puppies method. Okay, well, we should probably make that a thing. People were just abusing other people. They were beating them over their head with the XP practices and saying, oh, you're not pair programming and you're not doing continuous integration and you're not unit testing and blah. And it's like, no, that wasn't the point at all. And likewise, testing, no one said we need testing. Like if they were to rewrite all these methods, they might go, and testing is important. They might go, star, add testing. Yeah, but they didn't. So it's implied, but it's never explicit. Okay, and so in all of these agile methods, you've got this tester role is missing, or if it's there at all, it's poorly defined. It's just kind of this person who does some testing kind of stuff. And you've got, so some of the second generation methods, so parts of BDD talk about like 3 amigos and having a tester in the room, and that kind of stuff. George Dinwiddie, who's a lovely human being. And you've got folks like Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin, who are, wonderful, wonderful testers who are kind of trying to bring this message across. But at best, it's kind of missing or poorly defined. And so then I started looking at some of the training, and oh my goodness. So this is, I'm really, by the way, I'm aware I'm talking to a whole bunch of testing professionals here. If I'm about to put your syllabus up, I apologize in advance, but shame on you. So here's one I found. Syllabus, key points. The course consists of 4 days in the classroom. I'm like, wow, these folks are really selling some training here. What are those days involved? 50% theory, 50% practical workshops. This sounds ideal for my clients. Exercises that take you through what happens on a typical agile project. Perfect, right? Day 1, history and terminology, agile manifesto, principles and methods. Oh, filler, fluff. Okay, day 2, planning, requirements, estimation and strategy. Put your hands up if you've seen any testing yet. We're literally halfway through the course. You've just dropped 1,800 euros on or whatever, right? Tell me if you've seen any testing yet. I'll make it easy. There it is. Right, there it is, found it. There's a bit of testing on day 3, and there's a bit of test automation and something non-functional on day 4. Day 5, there's some blah and soft skills assessment. What even is that? Okay, and of course, it has test-driven development in because that's got the word test. I refer you to my 2003 article that test-driven development is a design discipline that has 0 to do with testing. Okay, hence test-driven development is not about testing. That's kind of the clue is in the name, yeah. So I'm like, well, let me have a look somewhere else. Let's look at this. Oh, this one looks good. Lots of bullets. This is cool. You'll learn understanding the top challenges with testing during projects, comparing traditional testing to agile testing, the agile tester role. Great. So where's the actual testing in this? There it is. Bit better. Bit better. Functional, non-functional, acceptance criteria, automated acceptance testing. So it's very opinionated about what this stuff is. And of course, oops. And of course, TDD. Because testing. It's got the word test in there. Yeah? Red, green, refactor. That's definitely a testing discipline right there. So I'm like, okay, so here's where it gets really wild. Certified Agile Tester, the CAT qualification. I don't know who does this, right? I don't know who this is, but who's supporting this? Barclays, Dormer, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, big hitters, right? I'm like, this is the one I've hit pay dirt. Right. Day 1, history and terminology. Scrum, daily Scrum. Daily Scrum, traditional Agile manifesto. Oh, nothing. Day 2, planning. Oh, wait a minute, hang on. Oh, there it is. There it is, I found you some testing. I found you some testing on day 2. Day 3, it gets better. Testing. Yes. Except that's the only stuff about testing. Testing. Oh, pairing. Yeah, that's definitely part of testing, and version management is totally part of testing. Okay, and then day 4. Oh, yeah, okay, a little bit at the top there. Right, non-functional testing, and of course, test-driven development, because that's what you should have in a test. And I was like, what? Right, is this really the state of the art in testing? And so I went back to my clients, these 2 clients, and I said, no. So I'm really sorry, I've looked everywhere, I can't find anything. And they said, will you put together a class for us? And I said, anyone here put together training? Anyone here do any training? No. It's, how hard is putting together a class? It's It's really hard is how hard it is. So I said no. And they said, please, and I said no, and they said, if you do, we will put 100 people through it in 4 classes back to back on one place, and another place they will put another bunch of people. And I was like, okay, so I did this. So here's what I want out of a testing class. I want to know test strategy. I want to know why we test. I want to know what we test, where we test, when we test, who we're testing for. I want to know about how to test, and not just test automated test design, but actual test design. I want to understand BDD's relationship to testing, partly because I'm the BDD guy sort of thing, but mostly because I think there is a relationship. And automation, which is like a little sidebar, and then designing for testability. What if you flip the whole thing on its head and said, maybe testability is a characteristic of code, is a characteristic of your process, is a left-shifted thing, and testing is all part of that testability thing. So, yeah. So that's where I ended up. Basically, I had to make up a testing class because the stuff out there was so shocking. Now, mad props to Lisa Crispin and Janet Gregory, who I just think are wonderful, and folks like Gojko Adzic, who's out there as well. There are a number of people doing really good agile testing training, right? They are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority in a vast pool of bullshit, okay? Oops, I'm being recorded. Okay, so now, idea number 3. BDD is appealing to testers, right? Because why? Well, here's the thing. BDD explicitly acknowledges multiple stakeholders, right? XP has the on-site customer, the omniscient wonder brain. Scrum has the product owner, the omniscient wonder brain, right? The poor person who's kind of trying to juggle all these things. We know that isn't how the world works, so we have multiple stakeholders. And we say all these multiple stakeholders have multiple competing needs, and we need to make sense of those needs. BDD says that. BDD explicitly says acceptance criteria is a thing, are a thing. So if we're not talking about acceptance criteria, if we can't possibly know when the thing is done, we have no right to be building it in the first place. And testers go, yeah, that's what we're trying to say. In BDD, everything happens from the perspective of the stakeholders, okay? So all of the behavior is from the perspective of stakeholders. That includes, if I have systems talking to other systems, I now have a system that is the stakeholder, right? That's okay, it's still from the perspective of stakeholders. And guess what? BDD increases confidence for stakeholders through evidence, and testers go, I recognize that. That's a useful thing, we should be doing more of that. And so therefore, it's not surprising to me at least that BDD often starts in organizations by testers bringing in something like Cucumber or SpecFlow and saying, we think this is a sensible way to write down example-based tests. Right? We think it's a useful tool. Even though the authors of SpecFlow and Cucumber say, honestly, don't use it for that, it's rubbish at that. I mean, it'll do, but that's not the point. Right? There are better testing tools, you just need to go find them. And so what BDD does is this, is it says testing is a differentiator, right? It's gone from being a governing constraint, from a thing we have to do, to being an enabling constraint, something that's going to help us do better work, right? So hey, maybe it's critical and it's differentiating. So BDD moves testing into the quadrant that I think it should be in, which is invest in Excel, which is the quadrant that all creative knowledge work in organizations based on technology should be in that top right corner. Okay. Which is kind of cool, except we're not done yet. Because the other thing I said is BDD isn't about testing. Because it's not. I don't think it is. BDD is about software delivery. Testing is a different thing. So here's what I'm talking about. Let's take a look at the life cycle of a scenario. So a scenario in BDD, it starts as an enabling constraint to guide the design. It says, do you know what? It doesn't matter how you build it. You've got lots and lots and lots of options for building it. But when you're done, these things need to be true. I need to be able to withdraw cash from an ATM, and the account needs to be debited, and you need to have the same amount of cash in your hand, and the card needs to be returned. And there's a bunch of things that we should be able to be confident about. I need to know that I don't get out more money than my account was debited. Otherwise, you're making up false money. That's bad. Right? I also want to know that if something goes wrong in the machine so it doesn't dispense the cash, that my account isn't debited. Otherwise, that's theft, and that's also wrong. There's a bunch of things that need to be true here. Okay. Then it checks the solution. I put a star next to checks. Guess why? Anyone? Checking versus testing. Has anyone heard this thing about checking and testing? So this is the context-driven testers, I think they're called. They change their name occasionally. This is basically a small number of angry Americans. Michael Bolton, James Bach, right? And I'm being deliberately, I'm teasing them a bit because they're both very, very smart individuals. If you speak to them, they're really, really smart people. And very opinionated, and honestly, a bit pissed off, right? And the reason they're a bit pissed off is because, item number 2, Agile doesn't understand testing. They've been fighting back, or trying to fight back for the last nearly 20 years, certainly 15 plus years, that actually we're missing the point of testing in all this Agile stuff. But I'm suggesting that they're kind of not engaging in a way that makes sense to the people they need to meet, they need to reach. And one of the things they did was they talked about checking and testing. And they said checking is a thing that a computer does, and testing is a thing that a human does, and it needs a human's brain and a human's insight, and humans, and don't get rid of testers. And that's true of any work, right? That's true of any work needs a human brain and needs context and blah, so it doesn't really differentiate it for me. And also, right, checking already has a perfectly good definition, thank you. It doesn't need borrowing and reappropriating. Checking is this. If I have a checklist with check boxes on it, and I put a check in it, which is a little tick symbol, that's a check, okay, then what that means is that I've checked off every item on that checklist. The clue's almost in the words, I'm going to suggest. So one example I use, I went to a conference in Aarhus in Denmark, and I flew back out of Billund Airport. And Billund Airport is this tiny little airport. And we were on this, it was a proper old-fashioned twin-prop aeroplane, like this. I didn't know they even had them anymore, and I was getting in one. And what happened, this thing is thick, this whole airport is covered in snow. And there was a guy outside in a big, heavy coat and a hood over like this. And he's walking around with a clipboard, and I've got no idea what he's doing, but he's doing this. Okay, now, it could have been theatre, but I felt safer having seen this guy walk around a plane and write a bunch of... I would be much less confident if a little automated Roomba had gone around going check, 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 right? I needed a human being to make sure everything was okay, and then I got in this plane and I'm here today, so it ended well. But that's checking. Right, and that's a human being checking, and what that human being needed was many, many years of looking at aircraft in dense snow to know that this one was safe to take off. And so that's a checklist. Testing is, well, let's see. I'm going to go with increasing confidence for stakeholders for evidence. That's what testing is. Anything that is doing that, you are testing if and only if you're doing some kind of activity that increases confidence for some group of stakeholders through evidence. Okay, that's testing. Checking is checking boxes, is doing single transactional activities to check boxes. Some testing involves checking. Some checking involves testing. There's a Venn diagram there, right? Anyway, that's enough. That's enough of that rant. Onwards. So these scenarios then, so they provide a governing, enabling constraint. They kind of guide my design. They may be useful as documentation. What does that mean? That means that for a particular feature, I might write half a dozen scenarios. I might write 20 or 30 scenarios that all handle all kinds of different edge cases. As someone reviewing those features, those scenarios, there's a diminishing return in terms of useful information. By the time you've read one or two of them, you can probably guess what the next 15 say, right? So keeping all of them as documentation is just bombarding you with documentation. I'll just keep the 2 or 3 that give you the basic gist, and the rest are fine. What does this do? It does these things. Here's a couple of edge cases so you get the gist. Oh yeah, fine, thanks, I got it. Right? And this is where we diverge. This is where I diverge with how most people use most scenarios most of the time. They may form the basis of automated tests. What does that mean? That means, say I've got my example with my half a dozen scenarios in there for my feature. And my half a dozen scenarios have guided my design. That's what they did. That was their goal. As soon as I'm there, I don't need the scaffolding anymore. I can take it down. The features works as far as I'm concerned. What I might do is look at those half a dozen scenarios and say, do you know what? I could write a really brilliant property-based test around those, generative test around those. I could write a test that generates 100 million variants of these inputs and blasts it through my system to make sure that it gets the expected answers. That's testing. That's giving me much, much more confidence than my half a dozen point solutions gave me. Okay? So I might design some tests based on those scenarios. So they might inspire some tests. But now I'm writing things that are designed to increase my confidence, not writing things that are designed to guide my design. Yeah? So the purpose of those things is different, and likely what I end up with is different. It turns out that I can sort of repurpose things that guide my design to give me a sense of confidence. And so we tend to kind of stop there. But they're different. Check, definition, inspect, investigate, examine, verify, not that other thing. But there we go. So what do I mean by the basis of test? So scenario is the basis of test. What general case is this example or set of examples an example of? Because if I encode and automate the general case, I'm gold, right? I'm feeling a lot more confident now. How can I gain confidence in the general case? Because if I can gain confidence in the general case, my half a dozen examples suddenly look a little bit thin, they look a little bit feeble, right? And now, for each of those general cases, which stakeholder does that serve? What needs am I meeting? What thing is going to make them sleep better at night based on this change I've made? And also, given the scenarios that led to the design, whose needs have we not yet served? Which stakeholders haven't been met yet? So I guarantee, I'm a programmer, I'm a 30-year programmer, I guarantee when I'm writing software, I'm trying to make the damn thing work. I am probably not simultaneously thinking about security as deeply as I should. I'm probably not thinking about compliance as deeply as I should. I'm probably not thinking about user experience as deeply as I should. I can iterate on those things, right? But if the security person comes along halfway through me doing that and says, what are you up to? And I go, I'm coding a SQL injection attack, right? Because it hadn't occurred to me that I wasn't, yeah? I'm busted, right? So if I take those scenarios were waypoints. They were enabling constraints, not governing constraints. They were helping me build something. They weren't telling me whether I had, okay? Scenarios are necessary but not sufficient, okay? And this is the big difference. So what does a good automated test look like? Here's my little checklist. I should have made these checkboxes, but I didn't. I will now. What does a good automated test look like? It has an intention revealing name. I can look at a test, and I can see just from the name of it what it's testing. Okay? And I can say, particularly it has intention revealing errors. When it fails, I want to know how it failed. Okay, I want to know why it failed. Ideally, I want it to tell me what to do. One of my favorite things, I use a shell called Z shell or Z shell. And Z shell has a thing built into it where if you mistype a command, it says, blah, 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 command not found. Did you mean? And then it offers you the one that's quite close. And you go, yes, I did. Thank you. That's exactly what I meant to type, right? That's what I want from a test. This is error. It didn't connect to the thing. Did you mean to use a different password? Because here's some other ones that are in your test data that you might have thought, oh yeah, I meant number 2. Thanks, brilliant. Let's fix that. I want it to have consistent language. I want to see domain language all the way through. Okay? I want to see domain turtles all the way down. I have a goal with a test, and this goes right back to like JUnit and even SUnit before that. Is this idea of how many asserts should you have in a unit test? Should you have 1 assert per test, Or should you have multiple asserts so you capture all of the tests, but then if any one of them fails, all the rest after that you don't really know, right? So my steer is this: I want the intent, the whole intent, and nothing but the intent, right? So help me God. So I want each test to encapsulate, each automated test encapsulates an entire intent. It encapsulates input validation. It encapsulates payment. It encapsulates whatever the thing is. All of those. I don't need to go squirreling around and find the other 30 near identical copy and pasted versions, right? And do the where's Wally thing. And I also don't want it to have any extraneous guff. So if I'm testing a calculation, I don't want it to spin up the web server and spin up a browser and connect from the browser to the web server and send an HTTP request and da-da-da-da-da-da and unpack the da-da-da and then JSON the result, the answer's 7. Right? No. Because there are so many moving parts in there that could fail. There is so much fragility in there. There is nothing to do with the intent. That's just noise. And it's slow, but it's mostly just noise. And so I want it fast, I want it close to the action. Okay? So these are things I care about. So what does a typical gherkin scenario look like? Well, it's really not fast. It's really not fast. It has a plain text parser, which then goes through a regular expression matcher, which then pulls out values, which by reflection invoke a method, which calls up a bunch of helpers, which use builders, and the helpers and the builders, oh, finally I've got to my code, right? At which point something happens, and then we go all the way back out again, right the way back out to some reporting thing. Fast it ain't, right? Intention revealing errors? Not so much. Or at least, if you're much closer to the action, it's much more obvious what actually went wrong. You can find the errors, but they are deeply, deeply nested in amongst all of the other stuff. Consistent language, kind of, maybe, sort of, depends. Right? Again, because you tend to have thousands of these things and they're all really similar to each other, it's really hard to tell what's going on. Which is a shame. Right? So what that means is that good scenarios don't make good tests. Good scenarios make good scenarios. Good scenarios make fantastic guide rails for building software, for designing software, for coming up with something that's probably a good solution. That's what their purpose is. Once you have that, we're done. Right? What you then want to do is say, right, these things, some of these things are going to make great documentation. Some of these things are going to make the basis of great tests. We should do that extra piece of work now. So BDD is not about testing. However, I would say testing is complementary to BDD. It's not supplementary. The two sit alongside each other in a really healthy ecosystem. BDD is about a whole team collaborating on building a product. Testing is about giving ourselves the assurance, and more importantly, all of those other stakeholders who weren't there, the assurance that we've probably done it probably right, or probably right enough. Okay? It's the sufficient to BDDs necessary. Right? It gives us it takes us the extra mile. It gets us over the line of confidence. And again, to all the people who weren't there. And so I think test thinking is absolutely critical to any successful delivery. Okay? And I think we don't have it. I say we as developers, the developer community, the Agile community doesn't have that. And that makes me sad because I think there's so much value in it. And testability, testing is not a thing that happens at the end. Testability starts with design, starts with your process. You can design testability into a system. An application made up of small, single-purpose collaborating pieces are much more testable than a big, fat, heavy monolith with thousands of lines of code. Okay, David Parnas back in the 70s said this. He said, testing 10 things that do 10 things is much, much easier than testing one thing that does 100 things. Okay? Testing 10 things that do 10 things is much easier than testing one thing that does 100 things. Reasoning about it, yeah? And Donald Knuth says, you can write something that is so obvious that there are no... you can write something that is so complicated that there are no obvious bugs, or so simple that there are obviously no bugs. Right? One of these is much harder. Yeah? So, BDD, my definition of BDD, writing software that matters for people whose lives you touch. BDD is not about testing. However, they really do have a very healthy symbiotic relationship, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. There you go. Yeah.
So the Rubik Cube, yours. And a good red wine.
Thank you. Now.
So,
Okay. I have a story about this. I'm serious. So when I was a kid, when I was about 12, these things came out, right? And Rubik was this like genius, and this is back in 19 yeah. So I got really into this. I got quite obsessive about this, and there were Rubik's Cube competitions. There were global Rubik's Cube competitions. You could enter them, and I entered one. And I got through to the finals. It was very exciting. And the finals were at the Hard Rock Cafe in London, and Toyah Willcox was there, and I was a massive fan of Toyah Willcox. I know none of you have heard of Toyah Willcox, but it doesn't matter. She was like a very friendly punk from the 80s. It was cool. And anyway, so 5 years ago or something, on British TV, there was the top 100 toys ever, or toys and games or something. And in at number something or other was the Rubik's Cube. And so anyway, it was Christmas time, and we've got a family over and blah. And we're sitting there, and my sister just said, "You were on TV." I said, "What?" She said, back it up. And so we rewound it, and it was a segment on the Rubik's Cube, and I had no idea, someone had filmed this thing at the Hard Rock Cafe in London of this Rubik's Cube competition, and it happened to be a fragment where I was doing a Rubik's Cube and Toyah Willcox was standing behind me, and I was like, wow, I just saw 12-year-old me on TV, that's weird. And the best bit was my sister was standing behind me looking at her watch really bored. And I busted her like 35 years later. You didn't want to be there, did you? No, I didn't want to be there, no. So yeah, we have history. Erno and I have history, yeah.